Did the US government and the CDC have enough evidence that mRNA vaccines were safe for breastfeeding women before recommending them? And did Facebook censor accurate information questioning that ethic? Look, why are you asking so many questions? Why don't you follow the science? Not that science, that science. Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to truth and freedom, and what a voyage it is. Thank you so much for supporting us here. Remember, click the red button if you want to support us further, if it's a possibility for you, and follow us on Rumble. It'll be incredibly helpful if you could do that. Now, during the pandemic and at its height, many people were questioning the efficacy of vaccines and the plausibility of them being safe for breastfeeding and indeed pregnant women, because how would you ever accurately clinically trial that? Now, at the time, it was very difficult to have those conversations because of online censorship of true information, because of experts who had concerns and questions being censored, shut down, deplatformed, ignored. Extraordinary things went on during that period. It's only a couple of years ago. Let's not forget how that went down. Now, new evidence has emerged that suggests that we were right to have those lines of inquiry. Let's have a look at the story now with a little more detail and see whether or not due process was undertaken by the CDC and American government before recommending mRNA vaccines, and whether or not Facebook did indeed censor legitimate, truthful, and helpful information.
Today, the CDC urged all pregnant women to get vaccinated.
Tonight, there's new guidance, the strongest yet, from the CDC urging women who are pregnant or plan to become pregnant to get the vaccine.
Some official recommendation from the CDC.
A continuation, because last week we heard the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine and ACOG issue their strong recommendations. Now we're hearing from the CDC about the importance of this vulnerable population, recommending vaccination. This is based on new data.
So no increased risks to be vaccinated while pregnant.
It is crystal clear why we're hearing all our professional organizations recommend imploring women in all 3 trimesters who are considering being pregnant or breastfeeding, get vaccinated.
It couldn't be more clear.
Correct.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jen.
Couldn't be more clear. Concerted effort to convey one particular message without dissent, without inquiry, and propose it as science or fact. Let's have a look at some additional information that might help us to review the level of certainty and confidence we just witnessed from the legacy media. This piece is written by Alex Goodentag on Public. It is safe for pregnant and breastfeeding women to get vaccinated against COVID-19, according to the Centers for Disease Control. In fact, according to the CDC, vaccination during pregnancy benefits the baby. And reports have shown that breastfeeding people who have received mRNA COVID-19 vaccines have antibodies in their breast milk, which could help protect their babies. So not only is it not dangerous, it's actually beneficial, with the vaccine trickling down through the generations like economic opportunity in an indefatigable capitalist system. The CDC wasn't alone. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology repeatedly urged pregnant and breastfeeding women to get vaccinated. There was no reason to worry, experts said, because injected mRNA stays in the arm and does not travel around the body. Oh dear, doesn't find its way to the heart at all? It is unlikely that the vaccine lipid would enter the bloodstream and reach breast tissue, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine assured mothers in a statement on the 14th of December 2020. If it does, it's even less likely that either the intact nanoparticle or mRNA transfer into milk. But now a pivotal new study reveals that this was always a lie. Isn't it curious how sometimes your intuition, your memory, and your perception and understanding of reality had already kind of informed you that there would be risks when a novel, to some degree experimental type of vaccine was being used across a population, that there would be perhaps additional complexity when it came to breastfeeding mothers or pregnant women that perhaps required further scrutiny. In the same way that we've subsequently learned that conversations around natural immunity were repressed, or vitamin D, or potential resolutions and solutions to COVID-19 that did not follow the prescribed course, we now know that some of those conversations were pressed and were controlled. Now it seems that this, one of the most sensitive aspects, one of the areas where the vulnerability is much more costly, is also being reviewed. The study, Biodistribution of mRNA COVID-19 Vaccines in Human Breast Milk, found that trace amounts of mRNA were detected in 10 out of 13 lactating women in a 45-hour period after vaccination. Our findings demonstrate that the COVID-19 vaccine mRNA is not confined to the injection site, but spreads systematically, the authors wrote. The study confirms previous results published in the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics last year. The 2020 2022 paper, Detection of Messenger RNA COVID-19 Vaccines in Human Breast Milk, found trace mRNA amounts in 7 samples from 11 lactating women. Crucially, the new Lancet study concedes that mRNA vaccines do not stay in the arm. Initially, it was thought that the vaccine mRNA encapsulated in the NLPs, lipid nanoparticles, would remain localized at the injection site and quickly degrade, write the authors. However, several reports suggest that the NLPs mRNA can enter the bloodstream and accumulate in distant tissues. The authors further explain how vaccine mRNA is carried to mammary glands. For lactating mothers receiving the vaccine, our results suggest that the vaccine NLPs will reach the breast tissue, they write. Despite being excluded from the main vaccine trials, many pregnant and breastfeeding women were mandated to get vaccinated in accordance with CDC guidance. Does it not seem extraordinary to you that CDC guidance, as well as the media parroting this consistent message, did not have access to, and indeed the trials were not even undertaken, that could demonstrate the possible dangers or inconsistencies with that messaging? Does it not seem troubling to you that at that time, just a few short years ago, conversation was literally closed down, that there was uniform messaging both in legacy media and on certain social media sites, where censorship was routinely undertaken, where deep state officials with direct contacts to some of these agencies were willing to censor, control, shut down and purge true information simply because it was inconvenient? Does this single story not demonstrate the necessity of absolutely questioning this type of information? The obvious intention to cleanse, control and dominate the media space in order to prevent reasonable conversations from taking place, experts with valid opinions being heard. It seems to me extraordinary. This is just a couple of years ago. And what we're talking about now, symbolically, significantly, are mothers. The sort of symbol, really, of the continuation of our species, the, in a sense, epicenter of many of our value systems. It seems casually unconscious that such a thing would be disregarded in this manner, but not at all surprising when we look at how the media has behaved regarding this issue and many others. The Lancet study demonstrates just how irresponsible and reckless the CDC's recommendations were. Now, we can't continue to bring you this content without your support and without the support of our sponsors. We are so grateful for your ongoing support, and we're grateful to the support of our sponsors. Now, do you know that the IRS October 15th tax deadline is right around the corner? So if you're scrambling, thinking about those estimated payments, expense write-offs and messy deductions, I've got a recommendation for you from our commercial partners, the attorneys at Tax Network USA. They've been absolute lifesavers for many, and their team has successfully saved clients over $1 billion in tax debts. So whether you're in the hole for $10,000 or staring at a $10 million debt, they're ready to help you. And hey, no judgment. Even if you haven't filed in 1, 5 years, or even an entire decade, they're equipped to secure the best settlement for you. So before the tax clock runs out, give taxnetworkusa.com/brand a shout. Okay, let's get back to this complicated story. CDC encourages all pregnant people or people who are thinking about becoming pregnant and those breastfeeding to get vaccinated to protect themselves from COVID-19, said former CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky in August 2021. Walensky made her recommendation based not on science but on faith alone. Oh my God, that's so extraordinary, isn't it? When you think how malign and neglected faith is, when you think how God or a belief in values and principles is regarded as sort of some kind of hokey crackpot superstition, and faith-based decisions were being made on the basis, or pretense at least, of science. Continually, people were just chatting to their mates, what are you going to do? Or we'll do the same thing then.
Are you going to let them have professional football? Nope. And she's like, okay, neither are we.
Science just operated, I believe, for much of this period as a kind of new orthodoxy to shut down opposition. It functioned in the same way that a medieval use of theology might have done. If you question this, you are a heretic. If you oppose these views, there's something morally wrong with you. It just seems astonishing to me that this information continues to leak out like breast milk. At that time, Pfizer and Moderna had not completed trials on pregnant women. Behind the scenes, in 2021, reports journalist Marianne Damasi, Pfizer was scrambling to conduct a clinical trial of its vaccine in pregnant women. To this day, Pfizer data on pregnant and breastfeeding women is still incomplete, and has yet to appear in a peer-reviewed journal or preprint and has not been submitted to the FDA for evaluation. Moderna's trial is also ongoing and the company has not released its data. So as of today, there is no clinical trial data available. So what was this we were watching on the mainstream news? Absolutely, it's crystal clear. Every single channel saying the same thing. Opposition censored, no clinical trial data. And what was the refrain? What was the rhetoric? Follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. What science? It was essentially wishful thinking, authoritarianism, preferences, politicized. It was at odds with science at almost every step. And the people that questioned that were regarded as kind of crackpots, heretics, and, as you know, conspiracy theorists. DeMasi reports that Pfizer's trial had major design flaws that would corrupt the data. Peculiarly, notes DeMasi, Pfizer planned to vaccinate all the mothers in the placebo group 1 month after giving birth to their babies, effectively getting rid of their control group. Well, that doesn't seem very controlled. Well, it does seem controlled. It seems contrived. It seems like eliminating the possibility that there would be a group available to show a lack of complexity. I mean, why would you do that? That seems like an odd anomaly. I don't want to come across as a conspiracy theorist, but one might sense nefarious intention in such an action. Regulators also allowed Pfizer to significantly reduce the number of women in the trial. For this reason, we may never know the true results of the company's study on pregnant women. Certainly if we do find out, it will be an accident. It certainly won't be because of transparency, clarity, honesty and integrity. It will be freedom of information requests. It will be people knocking on the door demanding, can we have access to that data? Oh, give us 75 years, will you? Also, we're not sure what happened to JFK yet, but this bullet sure got around. Proponents of vaccine mandates may argue that none of this matters because there have not been adverse events in breastfeeding children. But one of Pfizer's own post-marketing surveillance reports contradicts this assertion. Due to legal action, the FDA was forced to release the report last year. It showed that in 133 cases of breastfeeding babies tracked down by the company, 17 experienced clinical adverse events, and 3 of these events were reported to be serious. So that's some more information that challenges the legacy media narrative. Another Pfizer document released by the FDA under court order found that there were 215 cases of exposure via breast milk, maternal exposure during breastfeeding, reported to Pfizer's voluntary pharmacovigilance database. Of these, 41 infants experienced adverse events and 6 experienced serious adverse events. Rather troubling. Many may correctly point out that none of this data is complete or conclusive, but that is precisely the problem. Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there is no precise or conclusive information being offered because conversation keeps being shut down. Dissenting voices keep being censored. Legitimate experts who are offering alternative views are being shut down, silenced, shadow banned, whatever resources are available. That does not inspire a great deal of confidence, does it? Let me know in the chat. Millions of women were compelled to get multiple doses of the mRNA vaccines under threat of losing their jobs, and in some cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago and New York City, being excluded from public life through vaccine passports. Other women who willingly got vaccinated were told that it would have no effect on pregnancy and breastfeeding, but experts did not actually have the data to assert this was the case, and they still don't have it. Mandating pregnant and breastfeeding women to take an experimental medical product that had not completed clinical trials in their cohort undermined the bedrock principle of medical ethics, informed consent. The disregard for informed consent was not exclusive to mothers. It affected all women of childbearing age because regulators, doctors and officials were equally dismissive of women's concerns about menstruation. In 2021, many women noticed changes in their menstrual cycles after getting vaccinated, but health experts claimed that vaccines were not responsible. In May 2021, Dr. Paula Hillard, a pediatric and adolescent gynecologist of Stanford Children's Health, told the San Francisco Chronicle that it was biologically impossible for the vaccine to impact menstrual cycles. The virus, she claimed, was far more likely to change women's cycles. I've noticed many times that coronavirus conveniently appears to offer up the symptoms and effects that a potentially malign vaccine or offer up. You know what COVID does now? It's myocarditis, and it makes your breast milk taste the chemicals. So far, there's no data linking the vaccines to changes in menstruation. It does seem based on the certainty of the mainstream media, when it was relevant to encourage people to get vaccines, that there's potentially a bit of an agenda here, and certainly some questions that appear to require answering. And beyond questions, trials, clinical trials that need to be undertaken in order to deduce what the truth of the situation might be. The next year, a large study in the journal Science Advances found that reports of changing cycles were far from anecdotal. 42% of women in a survey of 39,000 reported that their menstrual cycle was heavier after vaccination. In October 2022, the European Union's drug regulator recommended adding heavy periods as a side effect of mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. So after an initial denial, it was demonstrably true that the denial was a little previous and ultimately untrue. It seems that what determines the narratives we're given is an agenda. This is what we would prefer. We would prefer that it didn't affect breastfeeding women, so it doesn't. We would prefer it didn't affect menstruation, so it doesn't. We would prefer that there wasn't any debate, let alone clinical trials, to oppose this agenda, so there aren't going to be any. Experts and once reputable institutions made reassurances about menstruation with zero clinical data at hand, shredding their credibility as scientific authorities. And when women first raised concerns about noticeable side effects, they were gaslit, ignored, and censored. The link between the mRNA vaccines and menstrual changes or fertility has yet to be thoroughly investigated. This question remains relevant as the FDA and CDC recommend another new COVID shot this fall, especially since this booster has been approved without thorough human clinical trials. They're still doing it. Nevertheless, the self-proclaimed advocates for women's health and women's bodily autonomy are conspicuously absent from the conversation. It seems that as long as big pharma and legacy media are able to effectively control the conversation, there can be no dissent, there can be no opposition, there can be no reasonable conversation in a territory and area where you would imagine that ordinarily there would be outcry and outrage about the protection of vulnerable people, and indeed who isn't vulnerable when it comes to a potentially intoxicating and, according to this, untrialed medication. The Lancet breast milk study highlights the major flaws of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and the ensuing mandates. Government officials, esteemed medical organisations, doctors from prestigious universities and experienced journalists told pregnant and nursing women that they should all get vaccinated and that there was no cause for worry. Only malign disinformation agents, they said, would suggest that there could be any problem. Dissent is akin to disinformation. Those two terms are becoming the same. Legislation is being passed to make it impossible to discern the difference between misinformation, malinformation, and just opposing views and dissent. This is yet another example of it. You can't have a conversation about, as we've seen earlier in the show, about Putin and whether or not Putin dabbled in previous elections. It's just passed off as a fact. Can't have a conversation about how we found ourselves supporting a proxy war between Russia and Ukraine and whether or not there were opportunities of peace that have been passed up. All of this is regarded as enabling or apologising. And the same with this issue. There is no issue where that template won't be applied. If you dissent, you'll be shut down. If you oppose, you'll be ignored. And simple and obvious basic questions about whether or not there are reliable clinical trials will cause you to be called a conspiracy theorist when, under ordinary circumstances, a lack of clinical evidence to support breastfeeding mothers or be taking a medicine will be regarded as a significant piece of information. We're going to have to leave that here on this platform and invite you to join us over on Rumble to see this video in its entirety. If it's within your means, please click the red button and join our community so that you can continue to support our independent voice in an increasingly maligned and censored space. Thank you. Stay free.